it should absolutely not engage in any sort of verbal combat with Medvedev, because that will delight him, and he will then accelerate his vendetta against the West even more.
Former Russian president has warned that British officials are a legitimate military target in their war against Ukraine. This is Dmitry Medvedev, of course, who is a deputy chairman of the President Putin's Security Council. He said that British military support for Ukraine was an undeclared war against Russia. He said the UK was an eternal enemy of Moscow. Let's speak to Elisabeth Braw now, who is a resident fellow at the American Enterprise Institute. She can help us understand the seriousness of this. So, Elisabeth, hello, good evening.
Good evening.
Do you see these comments as a serious threat to UK officials?
Well, we should always take seriously threats that are directed against individuals in the UK government or any other Western government, especially if they come from a person of a certain seniority in another country's government. But we should remember that for the past couple of years in particular, Medvedev has been on this rant against the West. It's extraordinary. Who would have thought this man who 10 years ago, or a little bit more than 10 years ago, was the voice of reason, the voice of moderation, the voice of the future of Russia, that he has descended to these depths where he issues personal threats against Western politicians?
That's interesting. You said that he was at one point the voice of reason.
Oh, he absolutely was. So I think your listeners will remember how he was picked by Putin to succeed him as president when Putin had to step down after 2 terms as president, and he handpicked Medvedev to be president. Well, Medvedev had to win the election, but which he duly did, and he was then president for 1 term, and he characterized, well, he stood out through his moderation, his wish to modernize the Russian economy. He wanted to build a Russian Silicon Valley. He traveled to Silicon Valley. I remember vividly how he received a state-of-the-art iPhone, the latest model iPhone, when he visited California. He met with Schwarzenegger, Governor Schwarzenegger at the time, and that was seen as the future of Russia. And now, a decade later, he is on a vendetta against the West. I think, though, that it's motivated to a large extent by his desire to make a name for himself again in Russia.
Right. Should the UK respond?
The UK government and the security services should clearly take an even closer look at the personal safety of politicians, including the foreign secretary. But it should absolutely not engage in any sort of verbal combat with Medvedev, because that will delight him, and he will then accelerate his vendetta against the West even more.
And when you said that we should take a closer look at the personal safety of some of those officials, like the foreign secretary, who of course is on a foreign trip at the moment, what does that mean in real terms? What should change in their day-to-day life?
So I think that one of the absolutely wonderful things that we have in liberal democracies is that our ministers are able to move about freely in society. They are not sealed off the way politicians in autocracies are, because in there they are afraid of the public. Here, our politicians only have to be afraid of lunatics and potential assassins. But with a major nation state like Russia having senior politicians engage in these sorts of rants and potentially inspire people to use aggression against our politicians, I think maybe even a bit more moderation in how much they move around in public would be called for. Unfortunately, that would of course limit their ability to interact with the public, and that is the lifeblood of a parliamentary democracy. So words have an effect.
Okay, Elisabeth, thank you for your time tonight. Really insightful. Elisabeth Braw, who is a resident fellow at the American Enterprise Institute.